a woman vanishes the night before her wedding. No body found, no evidence left behind. Just an empty bed and a wedding dress hanging by the window. The summer of 1984 in Pulaski County, Kentucky began like any other. Humid, alive with the hum of cicadas, and thick with the smell of honeysuckle drifting over the hills. For the Mills family, that June was supposed to mark the happiest time of their lives. Their daughter, 25-year-old Sophia, was getting married in less than 24 hours. The farmhouse she grew up in was filled with flowers, ribbons, and soft laughter, as her mother ironed the last of the linens and her sister finished the centerpieces. But by dawn that laughter was gone. In its place came the wail of sirens echoing down the narrow country road. Sophia Mills vanished sometime between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. on June 15th. The last confirmed sighting came from her mother, who had peeked into the guest room to wish her good night. Sophia had been writing something in her journal. The wedding dress hanging by the window, still in its plastic cover. Her car keys and purse were on the bedroom knitstand. Her shoes by the door. Everything suggested a woman preparing for the most important day of her life. But by morning, her bed was untouched, her shoes were gone, and there was no sign of her anywhere in the house or yard. Her fiancé, 28-year-old Daniel Harris, was the first to call police. He told the responding deputy that he and Sophia had argued that night. He claimed she got upset and left to clear her head. But when she did not return by sunrise, he started to panic. Deputies from the Pulaski County Sheriff's Office arrived around 7:30 a.m. and began a quick perimeter search. Behind the farmhouse in the direction of the woods, they found something faint in the damp soil. Impressions that looked like the shape of small shoes, but only for about 20 yards. After that, the ground turned to packed clay and the tracks disappeared. The area was rural and vast, surrounded by pine forest, overgrown trails, and the wide expanse of Lake Cumberland just a few miles away. Search teams combed the property for hours, calling Sophia's name through the trees. Neighbors joined in, driving back roads, checking barns and abandoned sheds. Nothing. By nightfall, state troopers had been brought in. A helicopter swept the area using infrared, but no heat signatures appeared beyond the property line. It was as if Sophia had walked off into the night and vanished. By the second day, whispers began to spread through Somerset. Some said she had cold feet, that maybe she had run off to start a new life. Others murmured that Daniel was not telling everything. He had been seen leaving the farmhouse late that night, driving toward the highway, though he insisted he had gone home and fallen asleep. His story did not change, but his demeanor raised questions. One deputy described him as oddly calm, like a man rehearsing lines. Sophia's family refused to believe she had run away. She was not the type to leave without a word, not with her dress already steamed, her vows written, and her grandmother flying in that morning. The Mills family pleaded on local TV stations, holding up photos of Sophia smiling in her bridal gown during a fitting the week before. She was happy, her mother told reporters. She would not just leave. As the days passed, search efforts expanded into neighboring counties. More than 100 volunteers walked creek beds and drainage ditches. Dogs were brought in, but the scent trail stopped abruptly behind the house near a patch of woods that sloped down toward a dry creek. Divers were sent into Lake Cumberland after a fisherman reported seeing tire marks near the boat ramp, but the lead went nowhere. For 2 weeks, investigators followed every possible angle. Did she get into a car with someone? Was she abducted? Did she fall into the lake? None of it fit cleanly. The town's small police department was overwhelmed, and for every rumor that surfaced, another dead end followed. One neighbor claimed she heard a woman scream around midnight, but the sound had been drowned out by thunder from a distant storm. Another said she saw headlights near the tree line around the same time, but could not say whose vehicle it was. By late June, the search was scaled back. Deputies described the case as inconclusive. There was no body, no evidence of foul play, just a missing woman and a handful of unanswered questions. Her name joined dozens of others in a state database of the missing, but to the people of Somerset, it hit different. Everyone knew Sophia. She had been a Sunday school teacher, a cashier at the local pharmacy, the girl who waved at everyone on her way into town. Within a month, flyers began to fade in the rain. The white church where her wedding had been planned still held a service that weekend, but instead of an aisle lined with flowers, it was lined with search volunteers bowing their heads. The pastor prayed for her safe return. Her father could not speak. He just stared at the front pew where Sophia's bouquet had been left untouched. By fall, investigators closed the active search, promising to reopen it if new information surfaced. Daniel Harris left Kentucky the next year, moving to Tennessee. He sold the farmhouse quickly, almost too quickly according to locals. Some thought he just could not bear the memories. Others whispered that he was running from them. The years that followed turned Sophia's story into something between folklore and tragedy. Kids at the local high school would dare each other to drive past the old mill's property after dark, saying her light still flickered in the upstairs window. For her family, it was not a ghost story. It was a wound that never closed. Her mother kept the same light burning in the window every night until the day she died. Convinced her daughter might someday walk back through that door, but she never did. By the end of that summer, Somerset moved on. The search parties stopped. The flyers came down, and the Mills family carried their grief quietly. Somewhere out there, a life had ended, or perhaps everyone thought a life had simply disappeared into the night, swallowed whole by the Kentucky hills. But investigators could not shake one detail that kept bothering them. Those faint shoe prints behind the farmhouse, the ones heading toward the woods, they stopped far too suddenly. It looked like someone had walked behind her and deliberately erased the rest. In the days after Sophia vanished, detectives started to see that what looked like a perfect small-town love story had deep cracks hidden underneath. From the outside, Sophia and Daniel looked like the ideal couple. A young pair in love, building a future together in rural Kentucky. But as investigators talked to family members, friends, and wedding guests, a very different story began to surface. One built on control, isolation, and silent fear. Sophia's maid of honor, a close friend named Carolyn Whitaker, was the first to speak up. She told detectives that Sophia had pulled away in the months before the wedding. She stopped showing up to their Thursday night dinners. She stopped returning phone calls. When they finally saw each other a few weeks before the big day, Carolyn said Sophia seemed distracted and on edge. She admitted she was having serious doubts about Daniel. She said he had started showing up at her job without warning, going through her purse and accusing her of phone calls she never made. It was possessiveness dressed up as love, Carolyn explained. And Sophia had told her she was not sure if she wanted to marry him anymore. But to everyone else, Daniel kept up the image of the perfect fiancé. Respectful, polite, hardworking. When detectives questioned him about their relationship, he denied ever being controlling. He said Sophia had been stressed and overly emotional, painting her as unstable and crushed by the pressure of planning a wedding. His story sounded rehearsed, delivered in a tone that felt more like disappointment than grief. He claimed their fight the night before she disappeared was just about table arrangements, that she had stormed off to cool down. Still, the holes in his story kept piling up. Sophia's parents said she had been sleeping in her childhood bedroom at the farmhouse for the week leading up to the wedding, a choice that caught them off guard. Daniel had wanted her to stay at their future home, a small rental house they were fixing up together in town. When asked why she suddenly moved back home, her mother paused. She said Sophia told her she needed space to think. A week into the investigation, deputies found something that made the whole case feel heavier. While searching through Sophia's personal things, one officer discovered a small envelope hidden behind her jewelry box. It was addressed to her sister in Lexington, but it had never been sent. Inside was a handwritten note, short, rushed, and without a signature. It read, "If something happens, don't let them blame me for leaving." The letter was vague, but it changed everything. It hinted at fear. Not fear of running away, but fear of being blamed for something she had no part in. Investigators brought Daniel back in for questioning. This time they pushed harder. They asked where he was between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. He told the same story. He left the farmhouse after their argument, drove home, and went straight to bed. But he could not remember what time he got there, and no one could back up his story. When detectives asked him to take a polygraph test, he said yes, right away. The results came back inconclusive. By late July, the investigation started to lose steam. The Mills family gave investigators everything they asked for. Phone records, Sophia's journals, even old letters between her and Daniel, but none of it led to hard evidence. The problem was clear. No body, no crime scene. The sheriff's department had other cases to handle. And in rural Kentucky in the 1980s, missing adult women were often treated as runaways unless a body turned up. The official story started to shift. Newspaper headlines stopped calling it a possible abduction. They started calling it a mystery. A woman who disappeared on the night before her wedding. Some people said she could not handle the pressure. Others whispered she was pregnant and ran off. To the public, the story became gossip. Something to talk about at diners and barber shops. But for the family, it was pain that grew sharper every day. Sophia's father became quiet after the third week. He would sit on the porch for hours, staring out at the fields where the search had started. Her mother could not bring herself to touch any of Sophia's belongings. The wedding dress stayed hung in its plastic cover, slowly turning yellow with time. The church still had her name on the schedule for the June 16th ceremony, a detail her mother never let them remove. Every Sunday, she brought flowers to the altar. She whispered the same words to the pastor. "If she ever comes back, we will be ready." The investigation slowed down through August and September. Search teams were cut back. The case file moved from one detective to another. They all said the same thing. Without a body, there was nothing more they could do. By autumn, Daniel sold the farmhouse he and Sophia were supposed to share. Neighbors remembered how fast it happened. Barely 6 weeks after she went missing, he did not attend the final volunteer search. He did not help pack up the Mills family belongings when they eventually moved out. And within months, he had left the state and relocated to Tennessee. The sheriff at the time said closing the active case was one of the toughest calls he ever had to make. "You don't want to give up," he said in a later interview. "But after a while, you have to accept you are chasing shadows." The box holding the Sophia Mills file, photographs, letters, soil samples from the backyard, was sealed and placed in a cabinet in the Pulaski County evidence room. It would sit there untouched for decades. Years went by. Life moved forward for everyone except Sophia's family. Her father died in 1996 without ever getting answers. Her mother, Margaret, became a quiet presence in the Somerset community. A familiar face often seen at dusk, standing by the window of her small apartment with the light glowing behind her. Neighbors said she never stopped believing her daughter would return. Every Christmas, she put a gift under the tree with Sophia's name on it. Every night before bed, she turned on that same lamp. When people asked her why, she would simply say, because she might be trying to find her way back. Over time, Sophia's story slipped out of the public eye. New families moved into the farmhouse with no idea what had taken place there. The younger generation only knew it as the house where the bride went missing. For investigators who were still around, it stayed a painful memory. A case with no answers, no crime scene, and no justice. Then in 2002, Margaret Mills died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72. When neighbors walked into her home to help sort through her things, they found that same window light still burning. On her bedside table sat a faded photograph. Sophia in her wedding dress fitting, smiling shyly at the camera. For most people, it felt like the end of a tragedy that had gone cold long ago. But for those who remembered the case, a quiet unease stayed. Why had Sophia written that letter? What was she so afraid of? And why had the man she was supposed to marry left town so fast, leaving behind nothing but rumors and silence? The truth was still buried, literally, and it would remain that way for 35 years. But time has a way of shaking secrets loose. And in the winter of 2019, a storm would do what decades of searching never could. It would finally bring Sophia home. By the early 1990s, the case of Sophia Mills had become a quiet ghost in the halls of the Pulaski County Sheriff's Department. One of those files that passed from one sheriff to the next. each one promising to look at it again, but never finding anything new to examine. The thin manila folder labeled only Mills, Sophia, 1984, sat squeezed between burglary reports and forgotten missing person cases. The edges were worn from age. The ink on the original witness statements was fading to a pale blue. Time had done what evidence never could. It buried her story under the weight of everyday routine. Still, every few years, someone claimed to have seen her. In 1991, a waitress in Lexington told a state trooper that a woman who looked like Sophia came into the diner late one night. Same height, same soft-spoken voice, and a faint Kentucky accent. She ordered black coffee, paid with cash, and walked out before anyone could ask her name. When investigators showed the waitress a photograph, she paused before nodding. "It could have been her," she said, but the security footage was too blurry to confirm, and the trail went cold within days. 2 years later, a drifter in Georgia was arrested on a trespassing charge. When asked for identification, she gave the name Sophia Mills. The officer who arrested her ran it through the national database. It came back with a hit on the missing person file. Investigators drove down, feeling hopeful for the first time in nearly a decade. But the woman was younger. Her fingerprints did not match, and her use of the name turned out to be pure coincidence. Another dead end added to the growing pile. Then came the Missouri Jane Doe case in 1996. A body discovered near a wooded rest stop looked strikingly similar to Sophia. For weeks, the Mills family waited as dental records were compared. When the results came back negative, the brief flicker of hope faded back into silence. By the late 1990s, even the locals who once spoke her name started to let it go. But there was one detail that never sat right with anyone who remembered the case: the speed with which Daniel Harris had moved on. He remarried just 2 years after Sophia disappeared, this time to a woman from Nashville. People whispered about it at the grocery store and in church parking lots, but no one ever said it to his face. He lived quietly, raised 2 children, worked construction, and kept a spotless reputation. Still, whenever the topic came up, someone always dropped their voice before saying, "That man's first fiancé disappeared." In small towns, memories don't die, they just turn into whispers. And in 2004, those whispers caught fire again when a retired deputy named Frank Daly broke his silence. He had worked on the original search back in 1984, and he claimed he remembered something that was never included in the official record. During a local radio interview about unsolved cases, Daly mentioned that he had personally found Sophia's wedding shoes, muddy, buried beneath a fallen log near a drainage ditch less than half a mile from the Mills farmhouse. Listeners were shocked. For years, the sheriff's office had said that no personal belongings were ever found outside the house. Daly said he tagged the evidence, logged the discovery, and handed it over to his supervisor at the time. But when he requested the file years later, the tag and item description were gone. There was no record the shoes had ever existed. The revelation spread fast. The local paper ran a small story the next day. Deputy claims key evidence missing in 1984 disappearance. It was enough to reignite old suspicions. People started talking again about the inconsistencies, the rushed property sale, the lack of follow-up. Rumors twisted into theories. Some claimed the sheriff at the time was close friends with Daniel's family. Others pointed out that Daniel's cousin worked in the county clerk's office, the same department responsible for handling evidence and filing case reports. For the first time in 20 years, the Mills case was back in conversation. Radio hosts talked on air about whether there had been a cover-up. Old-timers remembered seeing patrol cars near the Mills property on nights that were never officially logged. One caller claimed there was a rumor that an officer had been told to lose the evidence tag to protect someone. None of it could be proven, but in a town like Somerset, truth did not need proof. It just needed to sound close enough to it. Despite all the noise, the sheriff's department put out a single statement. "We are aware of the comments made by a retired deputy regarding the Sophia Mills case. At this time, there is no new evidence to warrant reopening the investigation." Behind that one-line statement was the same old problem: no body, no crime. A pair of missing shoes, even if they had existed, did not prove what happened. Still, it bothered people. The image of a bride's muddy shoes left behind in the woods hit something deeper than evidence. It felt symbolic, like the final trace of someone erased from her own story. Even Daniel's new neighbors in Tennessee started asking quiet questions. He never talked about his past. And when reporters briefly showed up at his doorstep after the radio story broke, he closed the door without saying a word. By then, most of the original investigators had retired or died. The new generation of deputies knew the case only as an unsolved mystery mentioned during orientation. A local legend, the kind of story they told rookies to remind them that some files never close. They just fade. Over the next decade, the whispers faded again. The 2004 storm of speculation died down as fast as it had started. The Mills farmhouse was torn down in 2007, the land sold to a logging company, and whatever secrets the soil might have held were buried beneath new growth. By 2010, Sophia's name existed mostly in memory and myth. High school kids who had grown up hearing their parents talk about the bride who disappeared started using her story to scare each other on stormy nights. They would drive out toward the old property line and dare each other to step into the woods where she was last seen. Some swore they heard faint crying near the ditch or saw a flicker of white deep among the trees. Most laughed it off, but not everyone did. In small towns, superstition fills the space that evidence leaves behind. For the Mills family, the story had long since turned to silence. There were no anniversaries, no vigils, no new appeals for information. Everyone who had loved Sophia was gone. What remained was an unanswered question that had stretched across 3.5 decades. A question buried somewhere in the mud, the paperwork, or the lies. The case had officially gone cold, but not forgotten. Because in Kentucky, old stories have a way of circling back when the earth decides to shift. And in 2019, that is exactly what happened. A brutal storm would hit Pulaski County, flooding creeks, ripping open the ground, and forcing the past back into daylight. And this time, the truth that surfaced would leave no more room for rumors. Every case here takes weeks of digging, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that were lost. We do it because these stories matter. Someone out there still deserves to be remembered. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth, please like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which part of today's case hit you the hardest. For more mysterious solved cold cases, check the link in the description below. Now, let's get back to the case. In February of 2019, Pulaski County, Kentucky was hit by one of the worst storms the region had seen in decades. Sheets of rain poured for nearly 48 hours straight, drenching the lowlands and washing over the narrow back roads that twisted through the old farmlands. Hillsides gave way under the weight of water. Creeks swelled into violent torrents, and drainage ditches overflowed, dragging years of forgotten debris back into the open. For most, it was a disaster that damaged barns, uprooted trees, and flooded basements. But for one small patch of land just outside Somerset, the property once owned by the Mills family, the storm did something else. It uncovered the truth. 3 days after the rain stopped, county maintenance crews were sent out to repair a collapsed embankment along an overgrown service road near what used to be the Mills property line. The area had not been touched in years. Just a sloping hill of dense clay, wild grass, and old roots. The workers started clearing out branches and shoveling away mud when one of them noticed a small patch of pale color mixed in with the soil. It looked like fabric at first. Off-white, maybe from an old tarp or curtain. But as the crewman pulled the clay away with his gloves, he realized it was not fabric from construction material. It was something thinner, softer, the kind of fabric you did not see much anymore. He called another worker over, and together they unearthed a section large enough to see that it was lace, aged, tangled in the roots of a cedar tree. When they tugged gently at it, something solid shifted beneath it. At first they thought it was a large rock embedded in the mud. Then they saw the unmistakable curve of bone. By the time deputies arrived, the rain had started again, drizzling lightly over the exposed hillside. Officers blocked off the area, holding flashlights over the disturbed earth. What they saw there would change everything. Wrapped within fragments of torn, discolored lace were skeletal remains, small, delicate, and unmistakably human. The soil had preserved them in a kind of natural tomb for 35 years. State police arrived within hours. The site was immediately secured and classified as a potential crime scene. Investigators worked carefully, removing layer after layer of packed earth, documenting every item that surfaced. Among the fragments were remnants of what appeared to be a dress, fine threaded lace that had long since yellowed with age. Forensic specialists collected each piece, placing it in evidence bags marked Site 4B, Pulaski County. Then one of them found something lodged just beneath the rib cage, a small locket on a rusted chain, half crushed by years underground. The locket was gold-plated, its surface dulled but intact. When they cleaned away the dirt, an inscription emerged, faint but legible. SM, the 16th of June, 1984. The initials and date matched the one etched into the missing persons report from 1984, Sophia Mills' wedding day. The news spread through Somerset before the state lab even received the remains. People did not wait for confirmation. They already knew. For years, there had been whispers that she was still out there, buried somewhere near the farmhouse where she was last seen. Now, after decades of storms, floods, and forgotten memories, the earth itself had delivered an answer. Within 48 hours, the Kentucky State Police confirmed what locals already suspected. Preliminary analysis suggested the remains were female, consistent with Sophia's age and stature at the time of her disappearance. DNA testing would take weeks, but investigators did not need to wait for the science to understand what they were standing over. One detective later admitted you could feel it. The second you saw that lace, you just knew. For days, the site was treated like sacred ground. Old neighbors gathered quietly by the road as the coroner's van carried the remains away. Some cried. Some prayed. One elderly man, who had been part of the original search team in 1984, stood in the rain and said softly, "We walked right past her." The bones were transported to the State Forensics Lab in Frankfurt. Technicians began the slow process of reconstructing what they could. Soil samples were taken to estimate burial conditions, insect activity, and the time of deposition. Every fiber of lace was cataloged, every fragment cleaned and preserved. The preliminary report estimated the body had been buried roughly 200 yards from the mills, farmhouse on private land that back in 1984 had been thick with underbrush and wild grass. Investigators noted the placement of the remains, shallow, hurried, consistent with a burial done in panic, not care. There were signs the grave had once been slightly deeper, but decades of erosion had slowly pulled it toward the surface. The storm had simply finished what time had already started. The community of Somerset was thrown into shock. For 35 years, the disappearance of Sophia Mills had hovered between myth and memory. A story told by parents to warn their children about trusting too easily, about walking alone at night. But now it was real again. Local TV stations replayed archived news footage from 1984 showing Sophia's smiling engagement photo. For those who had lived through it, the memories came rushing back. The flyers, the search dogs, the empty pews at the church. Within a week, the DNA results came back. The remains were a 99.98% match to Margaret and the late Robert Mills, the parents of Sophia. After 35 years, the missing bride had finally been found. The revelation rippled through the county. Churches held vigils. The local newspaper ran the headline, "Remains found after 35 years confirmed as missing bride." Former deputies who had long since retired came forward, offering statements of regret. One of them admitted that he had always believed she was buried close to home. "You don't move a body far when you're scared," he said. As investigators reviewed the newly uncovered evidence, they realized this was no accident. No runaway bride story. The lace fragments, the shallow grave, the broken locket, It all pointed to a violent act and an attempt to hide it. Forensic analysis confirmed trauma to the skull, consistent with blunt force impact. Suddenly, everything that had once been rumor had transformed into fact. The storm had uncovered what human hands had hidden. Over the following weeks, police began combing through the old case file again. They reopened every interview, every piece of evidence logged in 1984, now that they had Sophia's remains. Everything that had once been dismissed as circumstantial was relevant again. They traced ownership records of the old mill's property and found that the burial site had once been accessible only by a narrow maintenance path. One Daniel Harris had regularly used when visiting the property during construction of his and Sophia's planned home. When investigators brought the case to the Commonwealth's attorney's office, they made it clear. This was no longer a missing persons file. It was a homicide. But perhaps the most haunting reaction came not from the authorities, but from the people who had lived under the shadow of her story for decades. For some, the discovery was a strange kind of relief. A closing chapter in a story that had haunted the county for nearly 4 decades. For others, it reopened wounds they had learned to live with. People who had grown up hearing about Sophia now saw the truth laid bare. No longer myth, but bone and lace. The finding made local news across the state. And even national outlets briefly picked up the story of the bride found 35 years later. Reporters described the storm as the act that unburied the past. For the detectives on the case, though, the real storm was just beginning. Because the moment Sophia's remains were confirmed, all eyes turned back to the man who had once stood beside her altar, Daniel Harris. When the forensic report arrived from the state lab in early March 2019, it ended 35 years of rumor and replaced it with something far heavier. Fact. The remains found on the old mill's property belonged to Sophia, and the evidence around her burial told a story she could no longer speak. Her bones bore clear signs of trauma. Forensic anthropologists confirmed a fracture at the back of the skull, sharp, decisive, and consistent with a blunt force impact. The wound was not something accidental. It was not the result of a fall or a slip in the woods. It was deliberate. A blow that would have rendered her unconscious or worse before her body was buried. The soil packed around the remains was analyzed and dated to mid-1984. She had died the same night she vanished. The positioning of the skeleton told investigators even more. The grave was shallow, dug into a natural runoff gully that drained into the nearby creek after heavy rain. She had been placed in haste. Her body curled slightly to one side. The fragments of lace from her dress tangled around her wrists and shoulders. Whoever buried her had not gone far. In fact, the grave was less than 200 yards from the mill's backyard. Close enough that if anyone had walked far enough through the brush that week, they might have found her. But no one did. For 35 years, the ground had held its secret, untouched until the storm tore it open. With the confirmation that Sophia's disappearance was no longer a mystery, but a homicide, the Kentucky State Police formed a new task group to re-examine every detail of the 1984 case file. They combed through the old reports, reviewed the original witness statements, and retested physical evidence with the benefit of modern forensic tools that had not existed back then. Inside an evidence locker sealed in a brown box marked Mills property, they found the keys to a new chapter of the case: Sophia's car seat cover. It had been logged as part of the initial search but never fully tested, only photographed and stored. In 1984, the technology to detect trace blood under fabric was limited. Now, with luminol and advanced DNA amplification, investigators could see what the naked eye never had. Under ultraviolet light, faint stains began to glow beneath the fabric of the driver's seat. They were not large. Small smears and droplets that looked almost accidental, but chemical testing confirmed it was human blood. When DNA results came back, the profile did not match Sophia. It matched Daniel Harris. The discovery changed everything. The new lead investigator, Detective Aaron Callahan, described that moment in an interview later. "We had always suspected him. But this was the first piece of physical evidence that tied him to the car and to her final moments alive. Police quietly located Daniel at his home in Cookeville, Tennessee. He was 61 years old, remarried with grown children. To his neighbors, he was a polite, soft-spoken man who mowed his lawn every Saturday and never caused trouble. But when detectives arrived with a warrant, they said his calm demeanor shifted the second he realized why they were there. They noticed his hands trembling slightly as he sat down at his kitchen table. For hours, he denied everything. He said he had helped police search back in 1984, that he had given statements, taken polygraphs, done everything they asked. He said the blood in the car must have come from a nosebleed or a cut. Something insignificant, something old. But the investigators pressed harder. They showed him the autopsy photos, the broken locket, the grave site less than 200 yards from her family's house. The silence stretched on for almost 20 minutes before Daniel finally spoke again. He told them that on the night before the wedding, they had argued. Sophia had said she wanted to postpone the ceremony, that she was not sure she could go through with it. He claimed the argument escalated quickly. He had accused her of humiliating him in front of their families, of making him look like a fool. She had tried to leave the farmhouse to clear her head. He followed. According to his confession, he grabbed her arm as she stepped off the porch. She pulled away, slipped on the wet grass, and screamed at him to let go. He said he pushed her once, hard enough that she fell. When she hit the ground, she did not move. In his words, it was just supposed to scare her. Panicked, Daniel claimed he dragged her body behind the house, still hoping she would wake up. When she did not, he wrapped her in part of her dress and carried her toward the creek bed behind the mill's property, digging into the soft ground until he could hide her. He said he buried her before sunrise, then drove home and cleaned the dirt from his clothes. When morning came, he called police and reported her missing, saying she had walked out after an argument. In the recorded interview, Daniel's voice never broke. He never cried. He did not even ask what would happen to him. The most he offered was a single sentence at the end of the confession. "I plan to tell the truth someday?" When detectives later played the tape back, the chilling part was not his admission. It was how calm he sounded saying it. The district attorney's office confirmed that the physical evidence, DNA in the car, the proximity of the burial, and his own confession was enough to pursue charges. The case that had haunted Pulaski County for more than 3 decades was now officially classified as a solved homicide. The news sent shock waves through the community. Some people felt relief. Others felt disgusted that he had lived free all those years, raising a family, going to church, shaking hands at grocery stores, while the woman he killed lay buried behind her childhood home. For the few surviving relatives of the Mills family, the closure was bittersweet. Sophia's younger sister, who had long since moved out of state, returned to Kentucky to attend the hearing. Reporters noted that she did not look at Daniel once during the proceedings. When asked later what she felt, she said he took her life and then he just kept living his. Forensic teams presented their findings publicly. The fracture in the skull, consistent with impact from an object like a heavy flashlight or wooden handle. The shallow grave. The soil confirming a burial date matching the night she disappeared. And the DNA in the car. Each piece stacked into a timeline of panic and concealment. Investigators said it was a rare kind of closure. Cases this old rarely end with confessions. But they also admitted the final discovery came down to something no one could have predicted. If not for that February storm, Sophia's grave might have remained sealed forever. As word spread, people began visiting the site where her remains had been found. Some left flowers, others simply stood in silence. One county worker who had helped uncover the grave said he could not drive past the road without feeling uneasy. "It's like the storm wanted her to be found," he said quietly, though he did not mean it as superstition, more as resignation. In the official records, the file now read, "Case closed, homicide solved, 2019. But in Somerset, it was something larger. A reckoning. For years, everyone had wondered what really happened to the bride who vanished the night before her wedding. Now they knew. And though the truth was devastating, it carried a certain kind of peace. The unanswered questions were finally laid to rest along with the woman who had been lost for 35 years, only to return through the unlikeliest of storms. But even with justice served, there was still one final chapter left to unfold. One that would bring the story full circle and leave behind a memory of love, loss, and the long wait for truth. By the spring of 2020, the story that had haunted Pulaski County for 3.5 decades finally reached a courtroom. Daniel Harris, once the man everyone in Somerset believed was left broken by the disappearance of his bride, now stood accused of causing her death. The hearing was quiet, attended by only a few reporters and a handful of people who still remembered the case. There were no angry outbursts, no dramatic scenes, just the slow, solemn acknowledgement of a truth that had waited 35 years to surface. Prosecutors had enough evidence to pursue a full murder charge. But because of the time that had passed, and because Daniel's confession described a heat-of-the-moment act rather than a premeditated one, the plea agreement settled on second-degree manslaughter. When the judge read the charge, Daniel barely reacted. He did not look up. His attorney spoke for him, explaining that his client accepts responsibility for his actions and wishes for the family to have closure. Those were the same words people in that courtroom had heard in countless cases before. But this one carried a weight they could not shake. Sophia's younger sister, Claire, was the only surviving member of the Mills family. She had flown in from North Carolina to attend the sentencing. Time had carved its own lines into her face. But when she stepped to the podium, holding the same locket that had been found buried beside Sophia's remains, she looked eerily like her sister. Her voice trembled, but never broke. She told the court that her parents had gone to their graves never knowing what happened. She talked about the wedding dress that still hung in a plastic cover for years, the empty chair at every family gathering, the way her mother kept the window light burning long after hope should have gone out. And then after a long pause, she said something that silenced the courtroom. The storm that took our power, she said, also gave us the truth. Daniel Harris was sentenced to 25 years in state prison. As he was led away, a few people in the gallery said he never turned back once. Not toward Claire, not toward the reporters, not toward the photographs of Sophia displayed on the prosecutor's table. One deputy later said he seemed almost relieved, like a man who had finally run out of ways to hide. Outside the courthouse, the air was still and gray. Rain had started to fall again, light but steady, like it had so many times in this story. For those who had waited decades for closure, there was no sense of celebration, only the quiet release that comes when the truth finally stops moving. The case of the missing bride from Somerset was officially closed, but its echoes stretched far beyond that courtroom. The old Mills farmhouse had been gone for years by then, demolished sometime in the late 2000s when the land was sold. In its place, a small patch of grass remained, bordered by a broken fence and a few wild flowers that seemed to grow no matter how often the property was cleared. Locals say a volunteer placed a simple white cross near the edge of the old driveway after the discovery in 2019. It has no inscription, just a single date, the 16th of June, 1984, the day Sophia was supposed to be married. People still stop there sometimes. Some bring flowers. Others just stand in silence for a few moments before driving away. It is not unusual for someone to leave a small token. A ribbon, a scrap of lace, a handwritten note. One afternoon, a maintenance worker for the county said he saw a bride figurine placed at the base of the cross. Its dress weathered and pale. No one ever claimed it. In Somerset, the story of Sophia Mills became more than just a cold case solved. It became a kind of local legend, but one rooted in something deeply human, the idea that truth does not disappear. It just waits. People still talk about the February storm that tore through the county that year. They remember how it flooded the back roads, washed away entire sections of hillside, and destroyed property across the region. But when they speak about it now, there is always a quiet reverence in their tone. It is as if the storm carried something more than rain. something that finally forced the past to rise. In interviews conducted for the case retrospective, a few of the original deputies from 1984 admitted they never thought they would see the day Sophia was found. One said that every time a heavy storm passed through the area, he would wonder if it might be the one to bring her back. "You cannot explain it," he said softly. "Sometimes the ground decides when it is ready to let go." The Pulaski County Courthouse keeps a small framed copy of the original missing person flyer in its archives. A young woman with brown hair, soft eyes, and a half smile. Her photo now faded from decades of handling. Next to it, a note written by the current sheriff reads, "Case resolved 2019, never forgotten." For the people who lived through it, Sophia's case changed something fundamental in the way they thought about justice. It was not quick. It was not clean. It took half a lifetime, 1,000 unanswered questions, and one brutal storm to finally bring her home. The final sequence of the documentary lingers on the few surviving photographs that remain. Sophia at her dress fitting, turning slightly toward the camera with a shy smile. Another from a family picnic, sunlight on her face, unaware of the tragedy waiting just beyond the horizon. These are the images that people remember, the moments before everything went wrong. In the end, Sophia's story is not about ghosts or fate or revenge. It is about the quiet persistence of truth, the kind that stays buried until the world shifts just enough to uncover it. And in Pulaski County, Kentucky, they still say that on some nights when the rain comes hard and steady, you can hear it on the old creek bed, hitting the same ground that kept her secret for 35 years. For some it is just weather, but for others it is something closer to justice.